name is Kim Kelley. I'm honored to be here. Let's start with, what are we even talking about? What is child trafficking? So I want to ask you guys, because there's a lot of misconceptions about what child trafficking is and what it's not. It's been politicized, it's been scrutinized, it's been made to look like a conspiracy theory, so much so that so many people are so unwilling to even mention it, talk about it, think about it. So to oversimplify something that's actually pretty complex, child trafficking, we're talking about the sale and exploitation of children. We are not just talking about child abuse. There's this whole nasty, terrible spectrum of different ways children are abused. Separately, there's child trafficking. 100% of trafficking is abuse, but not all abuse is trafficking. You're following? Mm-hmm. So children specifically being sold, someone profiting from their sexual exploitation. Now I'm gonna do a little pop quiz, and this is for the sake of rhetorical questions. As you can imagine, I speak to a lot of different audiences, including TikTok and random people that don't always want to hear the truth and have a lot of things to say. Just so y'all know, I have a real dark sense of humor and a real sarcastic sense of humor. It's a very dark subject, but I'm also a survivor of child trafficking. I was actually born and raised into an international religious cult. Cults are very cringy, very creepy. No one's here to normalize that. Again, when I smile and laugh, I'm just giving the disclaimer. It's not an apology. It's my chosen form of healing. It's my chosen form of how I deal with this. And it's the biggest middle finger you can give to your abusers. So that being said, I take this issue very seriously. But I also can't take any of it seriously because it's so ridiculous that in 2024, the United States is the biggest source and destination of human trafficking on the planet. Did you guys know that? We're leading. We're number one. Now here's the pop quiz, because spoiler alert, this comes down to power and profits. Yes, there's other sick demand and supply, but power and profits is what this comes down to. I'm gonna unpack that. But here's the pop quiz. What do you think grosses more money every year? What makes more money each year? McDonald's or selling children in the United States?
Selling children.
What do you think makes more income? Costco or selling children in the United States? If you had to ballpark, how much do you think, let's unpack this real quick because I'm actually a data expert, okay? So the data on child trafficking is very sparse, it's also very inaccurate, but let's face the reality, traffickers aren't filing taxes, right? So we're just barely scratching the tip of the iceberg with whatever we can verify. Okay, ballpark for me, how much do you think selling children in the United States makes every single year? $50 billion every year. For context, I just looked it up. McDonald's made something like 23 billion and Costco was like 28. Both less than 30. Just think of the volume. Think of how many children that is. So why does this matter? But more importantly, why is nobody talking about it? So here's my one of many problems, right? Pop quiz. How many politicians have you guys heard talk about it? I'm not asking for action, I'm saying making sounds with their mouth. How many? Zero. Of all the politicians that we sponsor with our tax dollars, let's look at them like salespeople, right? Why wouldn't they even add the topic of protecting children to their sales pitch? Well, a lot of rhetorical questions, because I want you to unpack the logic for yourself. I'm not here to tell you what to think, etc. And this is also for all the people that, it's a theory, and I've heard it all, it's cute. But it's very embarrassing for them, because of course I love unpacking that ignorance, because people need to not only acknowledge this is real, like this doesn't make the bad guys go away, right? It's also not helping children. And it's also ridiculous to me that in 2024 we're scared to talk about it because I might be called a conspiracy theorist if I talk about protecting children. Like, oh, you can come say that to my face, right? Sometimes it takes a smiley, petite little female to kind of call people out, so I enjoy that. Here's another rhetorical question. Why has the topic of child trafficking never been mentioned on a presidential debate stage? Rhetorical, right? If you knew that this one cause would unite us all, the red, the blue, the old, the new, right? Who doesn't care about protecting children? Because it would unite us all. It would band people together that were in the middle or whichever side of the political, all that, okay? Why isn't it being talked about? That's a rhetorical question I want you to keep in mind because it's a big part of this. Got more rhetorical questions, but I'm leading up to all these points, okay? Now here's another one for you. First, I'm going to quantify it. Human trafficking, the sale and exploitation of humans, is a massive global problem. We all understand that. Narrow it down to the United States. Okay, so let's do like a spectrum or a pie chart of all the different ways humans can be trafficked. This is a dark subject, I'm just not going to get into details, okay? Labor trafficking, sex trafficking, domestic servitude, there's all these different ways people can be sold and exploited. Humans around the world, narrow it down to humans in America, narrow it down to children in America, all the different ways children can be trafficked, because there's also labor and all these other things. Narrow that down to children being sex trafficked. That generates $50 billion every year. It's also the second largest criminal enterprise on the planet. The second largest. This is not just like a top 20, top 10 issue. Of all the things to be concerned about in the world right now, second largest in America. It's also the fastest growing. It has a faster growth rate than drugs and arms and all these other things. This is really disgusting, but one of the reasons it's so profitable is because you can sell drugs or arms in a one-time transaction, but you can sell a human multiple times a day. I want you guys to know something. The average age, these are stock photos because we obviously can't actually take pictures of the children that we rescue in-house, and I'm going to get into that later. But these are representative of what it looks like. The average age of the children that we rescue is 7. I want you to understand these aren't like teenagers prostituting themselves, okay? The kids at our center are from 2 to 14 years old. Now, yes, it happens all ages, all genders, all races, blah, 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 blah. It's not a human construct, it's not a political issue, it's not a fantasy. So here's the rhetorical question. Quantifying the issue, as big as this issue is, why doesn't our federal government have a 3-letter agency that's dedicated to combating human trafficking? Of all the 3-letter agencies that we sponsor with our tax dollars and all the things they do, some of which are important, most of which are ineffective, but you know how they're pretending? You know how they're pretending to do the war on drugs and that's been... Mm-hmm. But they're pretending. Why are they not even pretending to care? Let me unpack that, because no one here wants more government involvement in anything, nor do we think they would actually be effective at solving a problem that they're creating and profiting from. But the rhetorical question, why aren't they pretending to care? Why aren't they even laundering money pretending to care? Isn't it weird that they won't even talk about it? Another rhetorical question. Because people are like, oh, but they're scared, oh, but they tried, oh, but they got blocked, oh, but they'll come after them, it's very scary. Hi, I'm Kim, I'm a child trafficking survivor, I'm 34 years old, I escaped when I was 20 years old. See how I'm making sounds with my mouth? Do you think it's acceptable for anybody to use the excuse of fear to prevent them from thinking about the scary things that are happening to children on a daily basis? Should we, the people, let our fear hold us back? Oh no, it's too gross, I can't think about it. Here's the good news. I'm not asking you to think about the gruesome details. I'm not asking you to research them or know anything about them. I'm asking you to do something. I'm asking you not to coexist with this evil. I'm asking you not to make excuses for the elected officials who have security teams and funding, right? That don't make sounds with their mouth about this. That don't even take action about this. It's not acceptable. If little old me is out here with this little light of mine eradicating darkness, I'm going to ask every single person in this country, what's your excuse? With all the love in my heart. Because to me, it's unacceptable that our generation allows this to continue. We will not coexist with this evil. We will not look the other way. We will not be distracted by all the things they use to divide, distract, and disunite us. I'm just speaking for everyone in this one instance only. Nobody here thinks that's acceptable. I understand that. Now, why aren't we taught about this? Why aren't we educated? Why is law enforcement not educated? I do a lot of work with law enforcement and current and former federal agents. We're talking about the good people in the agencies who are blocked from their leadership from doing anything, but who care too much, who have seen too much, who can't not do something, and who are either break the rules to do the right thing and or let us know what's happening so we can go do the right thing. It's messed up, right? I got a question before I go into what we do and how we do it. Because here's the thing, if you had a corporation and your management team was failing, they weren't doing well, nothing was profitable, everything was broken. If you were the CEO of that enterprise, would you blame your management? Would you be like, yeah, but they're corrupt, yeah, but they're too slow, but they're just inefficient and all these reasons? As much as we can all agree that the government is responsible for this, and I will unpack that further. Here's my question. How well are we managing them? Why aren't we managing them? Are we willing to manage them? Because we, the people, not only fund them, but they work for us, do they not? From the local to the federal level, they work for us. Are we okay with their performance? Are we ready to try something new, or are we gonna keep making excuses and pretending like they're too busy or they tried and they got blocked and it's scary? Again, smiley female, I can say a lot of things that, big tough guy might get some backlash for, but here's the thing. This is so urgent, we can't mess around and pretend like it's gonna fix itself. It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise on the planet. That statistic of $50 billion a year, that was about 4 years ago. Can you imagine what's happened since? Can you imagine the state of our borders and the amount of children coming through, most of which are not reported? Not to mention all the other forms and ways that children are trafficked. So I'm going to tell you just a summary of my stories. You can imagine it's a long one, but I'm going to touch on some key points. First of all, this whole speaking up and being vulnerable and unpacking my trauma so strangers on the internet can stop calling this a theory. Never thought I'd be doing any of this. Didn't want to, not my identity. Shouldn't have to be me, correct? So here's the thing. I'm gonna speed through like a whole thing. I was born in a religious cult. It was actually a Christian cult. It was one of the biggest. Some people are surprised to hear that, not everybody, but here's the thing. Well, let's unpack that later. So cults are a whole thing, brainwashing is a whole thing, control mechanisms are a whole thing. Like, I could write a book about each one of those things individually, but what society doesn't really understand yet is that it's one thing for you to be a kooky adult and decide to do something kooky with your life. Like, it's a free country, that's okay. But we don't have that line, not in the sand, in the cement, we don't have that line with, you can't bring kids into it. Like, you can go do weird stuff, but you can't bring kids into it. You can go to strip club, you can't bring kids into it. See how I simplified that whole conversation? So with a lot of these groups that still exist today, they operate under the guise of religious freedom or freedom of whatever, and people look the other way because it's not their business. Now, again, an adult who decides to do something with their life, we could unpack how it's a vulnerable person searching for community and acceptance, and they find people that give them hugs and they think, yay, and then they get wrapped up into it. They can claim brainwashing, okay? But here's why I call BS. Because when you're a child that's born into that environment, let me use an analogy. I hope no one can relate to this because it's weird, okay? It's like being born and raised under a rock and you're told that red is blue. And every picture on the wall and every book you read and every song and every single adult around you, like all the people, are saying red is blue. And a child is a sponge, so they grow up thinking red is blue and that's your norm, right? Oversimplifying a lot of things here, but you're following me, correct? Now at a certain point, especially if you have a very extensive mind like me, you might start asking questions and be like, I feel like red could be red, but what about in this instance? But they said that, I feel like this could make sense. But number one rule of a cult is you shall not ask questions. Trust, take it by faith, trust the science. Just go with it, don't ask questions. This is the best will. Again, whole other thing I could talk about cults and brainwashing, but here's why I have very low tolerance for the excuse of adults who know better claiming I didn't know better. Because when you're a child born and raised under that rock, the amount of not only mental fortitude that it takes to make that leap of faith, again, I'm using analogies, but these are really realistic. You're basically born on Mars and you're told that Earth is like a flaming ball of fire, and if you make that leap of faith, you're gonna burn and die and blah, you know? And you have no support, no family, you don't exist on paper, you don't have an education, you've never had medical care, I could go on. But as a child, you decide to make that leap of faith anyway. And maybe all you can comprehend is, once you land it, like, oh my God, I didn't die. And now what, right? Another rhetorical question. Where's the support for survivors? I love animals. We have so many shelters for animals in this country. Where are all the shelters for survivors of trafficking and cults and abuse of all kinds? So again, it's like a net negative when it comes to support, family, existential help, but you hit the ground running, and in my case, dark humor, have quite the work ethic, and you, in my case, I did a lot of positive things. I ran multiple businesses. I was doing good things in the world. Now fast forward 10 years, I was doing good things and running businesses, and I was actually donating charity and all that. But it came across my radar, actually from a peer of mine, that child trafficking is the biggest, America's the biggest problem, generating at least $50 billion, and I'm like everybody else, what? There's no way, no, because there's what I experienced and kind of tried to hide, and then there's realizing it's still prevalent today. And that was this just hell no from me. So of course I'm a research nerd. I actually own an online marketing business, and among other things I'm a data expert, etc. So I look into the data. It's just like, if anybody's a data expert, please look into child trafficking statistics. That's more proof than you need. Just how sparse it is, how inaccurate it is, how so many gaps in reporting, all that to say. I look into it and I'm like, oh, and then I'm like, who's doing something about this? Look at the politicians, look at the public figures. What? In America today, our country, how? That's ridiculous. So I'm gonna tell you more about my story. So I was born in Brazil. My parents are American, by the way, they're from Texas, okay? Kooky adults decided to join a kooky cult, weird hippie stuff, yeah, okay. Decided to have children, right? So I have I have 4 siblings. We're 5, born all over the world, American children. Unfortunately, of course, it wasn't just me and my siblings, it was about 25,000 children. Mostly American children, born and raised, all forms of abuse, including trafficking, all over the world, almost every country. So I was born in Brazil, and then I lived in Mexico for about 10 years of my childhood. Dark humor, and you can laugh with me, it's okay. It's just that, again, chosen form of release. Now I'm gonna tell you a specific story about the impact of awareness, because I'm not just here to talk and make you mad. I'm here to raise your awareness, which is step 1. Acknowledgement, right? Awareness means acknowledgement. Step 2 is taking action. Now, if you're not aware of the problem, if you're not informed about what it is, what it isn't, then your action won't be effective, or you won't take action. So multiple layers are needed here. Awareness is a big one, but awareness without action, just like faith without works, doesn't do too much. So as a country, we need both things. Now, I've added a third recently, which is acceptance. Because a lot of people are aware, but they cannot accept. They do not want to acknowledge or accept that it's true, that it's real, and that there's something all of us can and therefore must do to be part of the solution. Once again, if little old me can do something. All right, so here's the story. There are 2 reasons that I did not suffer worse abuse as a child. I was born in '89. My oldest sibling was born in the '70s, and by comparison, our upbringing was almost night and day difference in terms of contrast, even though terrible. And here's why. I just happened to be born last, right? Sorry, over here, speak with my hands a lot. So around the time I was born in Brazil, there was a series of international raids, because by that time enough people had left the cult, escaped, etc., notified local authorities and raised awareness and notified media, and it took too long, but finally there was several coordinated raids around the world where local authorities stormed these compounds. They rushed in, middle of the night or whatever, they arrested the adults, and they rescued the children. Okay, I'm gonna pause right there, because we're coming back to that. Real quick, there's a misunderstanding that just because you see headlines that children are rescued, you would assume they're now safe, correct? Like not gonna be returned to that situation? Okay. However, I'm gonna just speed through this one. I'm gonna give the local authorities the benefit of the doubt that they were not prepared for what they were gonna encounter in these compounds, right? 75, 150 people, 30, 50 kids, whatever. They didn't have the resources, they weren't prepared, and they definitely did not have trauma-informed therapy. They didn't know what to look for, they didn't know how to help. Also, third world countries. I was in Brazil, the closest raid to me was in Argentina, totally different country, same continent. The others were Australia and France and all these different continents. All right, so children were rescued. And often in these third world institutions, many children suffered worse abuse than what they had otherwise been experiencing, to the extent that some children died. Now, what do you think happened to the adults? I'm going to fast forward 2 short years. There was an international court case, and of course there's court documents and evidence of all of this. But guess what? On an international level, the group was acquitted. Never mind, go home, everybody's fine. Not one adult was convicted. Not one child was spared. Returned. Oops, never mind. Unpack that corruption on an international level. Unpack that failure of the United States government that failed us. Our story should have ended there. Imagine, like, we could have had a semblance of a childhood. We could have at least, they could have helped, they could have done something. They could have kept tabs on us. No, nope. But here's what it did do. Because I have this theory. I say this often. Awareness is not just a feel-good term when it comes to child trafficking awareness. Awareness actually reduces the predator's ability to operate. It makes it harder for bad guys to get away with doing bad things to children when we, the people, are aware. We're holding them accountable. We are not letting them go. So, what it did do is it forced the cult to pretend to be less abusive. They literally burnt the books. They implemented safeguards. Like, if I told you them, they'd be ridiculous, because like the level of, the correction, anyway, ridiculous. But anyway, that happened. So, the other thing it does is that even though there might be like this direct, case involved where you see these bad guys being arrested, etc., what people don't see is the domino effect, the ripple effect. Because what it does, again, not only those 7 instances or compounds or cities, but it had that ripple effect on tens of thousands of children. Now, it wasn't enough. Our story should have ended there, and I could say a lot more, but it did have a massive impact within the network. It reduced the predator's ability to operate. So there's a lot more I could say there about the impact of awareness. But again, I'm going to bring it back to we the people's responsibility. So let's accept a few things, right? I'm going to give you one of 2 options. Child trafficking in the United States is either, I've overthought this as you can imagine, it's either intentional or it's incompetence. Is there a third option? Either way, it's unacceptable. But if it's incompetence, like, let's have that conversation, because what are we funding? Intentional means it's not that they're turning a blind eye. It's not only that they're allowing this, it's that it is by design on behalf of the federal government. I'm gonna let you chew on that, because that's hard to accept, right? That's our government, our country, the people that we're funding. Now, if it wasn't intentional, realize it wouldn't be thriving. They'd be talking about it, because who wouldn't care about protecting children? No political party is talking about this. And okay, to be fair, I've also overthought this. There are less than 10 politicians that have talked about this. To be fair. No applause needed. Okay. So, intentional also means that it is being facilitated. This might blow your mind. We rescue the majority of the children that we rescue from religious organizations that are contracted by the federal government to traffic children and launder money. 501c3 organizations, most of them religious, all of them tax deductible, all of them are great for money laundering, and every politician, from the local to the state to the federal, gets their cut. In all your favorite states, even the ones that claim God, country, family. Specifically Texas, for sure. Now let's give an example. Let's unpack this intentional aspect, right? Let's talk about the southern border. I know that's hot topic, etc. We're going to specifically talk about how it's affecting children, why it's such a big deal. Now, like I said, I lived in Mexico for 10 years of my life. I've crossed that border more than any child should. We all know, I think, in this room, there's a lot the media isn't telling you. We know that, right? We understand that there's a lot of propaganda and all of that. But here's the truth. The cartel is not a gang. The cartel is la empresa. It's the enterprise. It's the shadow government. Mexico's government, cartel, same, okay? In the United States, what's our government? What's the English term for a cartel? I'm not gonna say mafia, but I'm just, okay, but it's the enterprise, all right. So the southern border issue would not be thriving if it did not have the support, if it was not facilitated from both sides, Mexico and the United States. Now, I don't look at this situation like a them versus us situation, like an America versus whatever. It's a humanitarian crisis. Now, of course I want border safety, of course, like, by the way, I'm fair, let's not let them in, and I can unpack, like, trafficking across the border real quick if y'all want, because there's a 3-layer process to that, and the short version is no one's talking about what happens once they get to the river, once they get to the government processing centers, and once they get into the United States. And that's called domestic servitude, and that's a whole other layer of that journey. So all that to say, like, I'm not advocating for that. No, people don't know what they're saying when they say that. But for the avoidance of doubt, of course, there's no child walking across the border by themselves unaccompanied. Like, I can't play stupid that hard. So what's happening? It's being facilitated. Why? Because people are profiting, politicians, people in power are profiting off of it. It's also very profitable for the corporations that hire illegal immigrants. Now, what do you think would happen if they put one CEO in jail for hiring illegal immigrants? And why haven't they done that? Rhetorical question, right? I'm just unpacking how this has been facilitated to so many degrees. Obviously, I could go on about all kinds of government corruption, but what I'm talking about specifically is child trafficking, and I'm going to keep it very focused because there's all these offshoots, of course, right? Just to touch on real quick, generally it's not like one form of bad thing happening. Generally there's multiple drugs, trafficking, sex, all these different things, okay? I'm, again, talking about child trafficking, but it's kind of leads into everything else. So I'm going to tell you another story from, I was in Brazil, then Mexico, and for 4 years of my childhood, I was in Houston, Texas, United States, Houston, Texas. For those who don't know, Houston, Texas is actually one of the biggest hotspots of human trafficking in the country. Did you guys know that? There's a lot of big cities, but Houston's one of the biggest ones. It's a big drop point. They come across the southern border and disperse a lot of people there. It's a port, it's an airport, there's all these reasons, and it's very corrupt. Whole other story, but I recently talked to the DA of Harris County, and that was cool because no one else could get to her, but this smiley little face could, and it was cool. So here's the story. For 4 years of my childhood, from the age of 10 to 14 years old, obviously a child, not like maybe 17, a child, okay? Every single week, I was on the streets, I was in restaurants, I was in shopping malls, I was in grocery stores, I was in people's houses, I was in the Georgia Brown Convention Center, I was in all these famous landmarks every single week. And hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people walked by. You know, Christians wanted to debate about denominations, like people had all of these things to say. But you know what I realized just a couple years ago? Not one person, not one concerned citizen or law enforcement officer had the awareness or the courage to ask a child if they're okay. Often I was by myself. To say, what are you doing here? Why are you not in school? Where are your parents? Why are you collecting money? Have you eaten today? Where do you live? You don't go to school, what do you? Not one person. This isn't about being bitter. It was just this realization I had a couple years ago when I was actually doing a speaking event, and I was like, that's crazy. Can you imagine seeing like a 12-year-old on the, corner and just be like, oh, it's totally normal. Walk on by. So here's the thing. It's not about, let me unpack this a little bit, right? Dark humor, but it's true. My parents are evil. I don't just mean that because they allowed us to be trafficked. They were actually some of the top leaders in this cult. It's not a flex. That means they were some of the most evil. They were responsible for not only, obviously, all my siblings, but the abuse of tens of thousands of children. Like, I'm just quantifying. It's like being Ghislaine Maxwell's daughter. Seriously. Okay, so, like on a spectrum of evil, there's Hillary Clinton and my mom. I'm just saying. Okay, for real, yeah. So all that to say, at the time we lived in Houston, and if I would have been, like if someone had asked the right questions, then I would have been rescued, right? I would have been returned to my parents. So that wouldn't necessarily have been helpful, right? That's complicated. But here's what it would have done. It would have reduced the predator's ability to operate. Maybe we could have gone to school, or gotten medical care, or had some semblance of a childhood. Maybe I could have spent less time on the streets. But here's the actual point. tens of thousands of children could have spent less time on the streets if one person could have had the awareness and the courage to do something. So we, the people, have a responsibility, not to try to research all the gruesome details and find out how dark the darkness is, not to just be mad and shake our fist and issue the blame on everybody else, but to do something. We're for sure going to talk about action steps. We're for sure going to talk about how everyone can be part of the solution. And I'm not asking anybody to put themselves in harm's way. I'm not asking anybody to be Rambo or risk your life. Like, don't even go there. It's not what this is. In fact, that's a terrible idea. So all that to say, let's talk about community awareness. So who's really leading this charge? We talked about politicians, just not at all, right? I'm never going to remove the blame from the government, but like, okay, big problem. Also, who else? I'm not even going to talk about celebrities, because like, why? Public figures, some, you can probably name like 3 to 5, maybe. If you know too much, you probably know that there's a lot of people positioning like they're part of the solution and they're actually part of the evil, and that just irks me to my core. I'm talking about big organizations and the pretty ones, and a lot of them, like again, I think of everything on a spectrum of intensity. There's a spectrum of like saying but not doing. There's misappropriating funds, which is like actually really needed for survivors, but you're putting them in your pocket. And then there's people that are positioning as if they're part of the solution who are actually part of the evil. Because that's a really good front to rescue children. You know how they say no one hates a bad cop more than a good cop? Irks me to my soul. I was talking about cults. A lot of big bad cults still exist today. A lot of those cults operate under the guise of religious freedom or yay, God and country. I just want you to realize something. Every cult has a front. Now I'm going to expand your understanding, not specifically of cults, but more of controlled groups who do things nefariously under the guise of something nice and yay. So for example, yay God, yay country, and they're actually trafficking children. Why? Because the yay God stuff makes people think, oh, they're just good people, leave them alone. Yeah. I'm not asking you to mistrust everybody you know, but I'm asking you to look deeper. I'm asking you to be aware of the tactics that predators use, because predators are strategic. Because predators will position themselves in places of power and trust and authority, not only to mislead people, but also to gain access to the innocent. Now, all the way from the federal level down to, I'm obviously not saying all these people are predators, but I'm saying if you are a predator, you will want to have direct access to children. You will want to work at those jobs and be a school teacher or a sports coach or a religious leader, blah, blah, blah. Again, for the avoidance of doubt, I'm obviously not saying they're all bad. I'm saying don't assume that just because somebody is praying the same way you pray in the building as you, that they're necessarily safe for your children. Or that just because they're like, yay God, that they're necessarily genuine about it, okay? I'm stating a lot of obvious, but I just want you guys to know how often these groups get away with their yay front, whatever it is, fill in the blanks. A lot of them get away with it. A lot of them launder money with it, but specifically are harming children, and that's not okay with any of us. I know some people have to get home, and I just want to give a strong call to action. We can keep talking if you want to say. I want to challenge you guys to pick one thing you can do in the next 24 hours. Because sense of urgency, because we're all busy with our lives and we get distracted and things happen. But I want you to take away from this conversation one thing you can do in the next 24 hours to be part of the solution. That could be monitoring your kids' internet safety. That could be making sure they don't have unlimited, unsupervised access to the internet. Please don't do that. That could be getting involved in your community. That could be starting some sort of small organization within your community. That could be getting involved in your school board. That could be donating to people like us that are actually doing the real work. I want to challenge you to pick one thing you can do. Does anyone think that's unreasonable?
No.
Yeah. Let's flip this group culture. Let's start being not only leading by example, but let's make people feel weird for not being part of the solution. Let's make them feel pathetic for not stepping up to do something to help. Do you guys agree?
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right.